Craig Adams stepped onto his front porch, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. The crisp North Carolina morning greeted him, but something felt off. His multi-million-dollar home, his pride and joy, sat as regal as ever on its perfectly landscaped property. But there was a disturbance, something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't until he checked his mailbox that the first seed of unease was planted. Among the usual letters and bills, he found a notice from the Homeowners Association. The subject line stopped him cold. Confirmation of property sale. New owner inquiry. His breath caught in his throat. New owner? He hadn't sold his house. He hadn't even considered it. Craig's mind raced as he tore open the letter. The HOA was requesting confirmation of the sale because someone had asked for gate access to his private community. Someone claiming to be the new owner. He quickly dialed the HOA's number, his fingers clumsy against the keypad. Good morning. This is Lisa from Wakefield Estates HOA. How can I assist you? This is Dr. Craig Adams. I just got a letter saying I sold my house. I didn't sell anything. There was a pause. Then Lisa spoke, her tone careful. Oh, I see. That's odd. The new owner filed paperwork with the county and asked for access to the community. They provided official deed documents. Craig's heart pounded. That's impossible. Lisa hesitated before responding. Would you like to see a copy? He could barely form the words. Yes, send it now. Within minutes, an email notification pinged on his phone. He opened the attachment, his eyes scanning the document. There it was, black and white, stamped and recorded. The deed to his house. No longer in his name. The listed owner, Dawn Mangum Trust. His coffee cup slipped from his grasp, shattering on the porch. Something was very, very wrong. Craig Adams stormed inside, his pulse hammering in his ears. He dropped into his leather chair, staring at the document on his laptop screen. His name, his rightful claim, was gone. In its place, the Dawn Mangum Trust was now listed as the legal owner of his home. He needed answers. His first call was to the Wake County Register of Deeds. As he paced across his office, the phone rang twice before a woman answered. Wake County Register of Deeds, how may I help you? Craig barely took a breath before responding. My name is Dr. Craig Adams. I just received a notice that my property, my home, was transferred to someone else. I never sold my house. How is this possible? There was a pause on the line. Let me look up the record, sir. Can you provide the address? He rattled it off, fingers gripping the armrests of his chair. After a few keystrokes, the woman's voice returned. Yes, sir. The deed was transferred last month. The new owner is listed as Dawn Mangum Trust. The document was signed and notarized. Craig sat bolt upright. Signed? By who? By you, sir. The room spun. That's not possible. I never signed anything. Someone forged my signature. Another pause. Sir, according to the documents, a notary public verified the transfer. It's already been recorded in the system. Craig gritted his teeth. So, you're telling me that someone can just sign my name, and that's enough for the county to hand over my house? Sir, the Register of Deeds is not required to verify the authenticity of the notary or the signature. We only record the document once it's properly submitted. Craig's jaw clenched. No verification, no checks. His multi-million-dollar home had just been stolen with a few strokes of ink. His next move was clear. Who is the notary that signed off on this? He asked. The woman read off a name. It meant nothing to him, but he jotted it down. Craig's hands were already dialing a number before he even realized it. His lawyer. The call connected. Hey, Craig, what's up? I think my house just got stolen. Silence. Then, I'm on my way. Craig exhaled, fists tightening. Whoever did this was about to learn that they had picked the wrong man to steal from. Craig's lawyer, David Langford, arrived at his house within the hour, his face grim. He stepped inside, setting his briefcase down with a thud. "Tell me everything," David said, rolling up his sleeves. Craig spun his laptop around, the fraudulent deed still glaring on the screen. "This? My house. Apparently it's not mine anymore." David leaned in, scanning the document. He muttered something under his breath. "This is bad." Craig pinched the bridge of his nose. "I called the county. They told me my signature was on that deed, notarized and official." David's gaze darkened. "Did you recognize the notary's name?" "Number, never heard of them." David pulled out his phone and tapped on the screen. After a few moments, he looked up. "I just checked. This notary's license is questionable." Craig's stomach twisted. "Meaning?" "Meaning she's had multiple complaints filed against her. Cases of improper verification. Possible fraud." Craig exhaled sharply. "So, you're telling me someone with a history of shady deals signed off on the theft of my house?" "Looks like it." Craig paced the room, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "What do we do next?" David didn't hesitate. "First, we file an affidavit of fraud with the county. That will put a cloud on the title, which means the thief can't legally sell the house or take out loans against it." Craig nodded. "And then we find this Dawn Mangum. A name, a phantom. The so-called new owner who had stolen his home." David flipped through public records on his laptop. She listed herself as the owner under something called the Dawn Mangum Trust. That's a legal shield. Makes it harder to track who's really behind it. Craig's hands curled into fists. "But not impossible." David smirked. "No, not impossible." He typed a few more lines. Then he stopped. His eyebrows shot up. Craig leaned in. "What?" David turned the screen toward him. "She's already filed a request with the city to evict you." Craig's breath hitched. "She's not just stealing your house," David said. "She's trying to kick you out of it." Craig felt his blood run cold. Eviction? In his own house? David scrolled through the court documents on his laptop. "She filed a formal eviction notice stating that you are trespassing on her property." Craig clenched his fists. "I built this house, paid for every brick, every inch of land. And now some stranger files a piece of paper, and I'm suddenly an intruder?" David's expression was grim. "That's how these fraudsters work. Once they get their name on the deed, they move fast. Some even take out loans against the house or flip it to an unsuspecting buyer before the real owner even realizes what happened." Craig sat down, trying to control his breathing. "How soon can she get the eviction through?" David scanned the document. "She filed it last week. You've got a hearing scheduled in 10 days. Craig's heart pounded. 10 days before a court decides whether or not I get kicked out of my own home. David closed his laptop. "We're not waiting. We need to go to the county clerk's office and file an official challenge. And we need to find Dawn Mangum." Craig exhaled sharply. "Do we have an address?" David nodded. "Public records show she has a mailing address in Raleigh, but no residential property listed in her name. It's a P.O. box." Craig gritted his teeth. "So she could be anywhere." David tapped his phone. "Not necessarily. I've got a private investigator contact. If she's been signing legal documents, paying bills, or setting up fake trusts, she's left a trail." Craig stood up. "Let's find her." David held up a hand. "First, we do things the legal way, file the fraud affidavit, and stop the eviction. If we don't, the court may actually rule against you." Craig sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine. What do we need?" David pulled out a pen and paper. "We need to gather everything. Your mortgage documents, property tax records, utility bills, anything that proves continuous ownership. We also need to get a forensic handwriting analyst to prove the signature on that fraudulent deed isn't yours. Craig's eyes darkened. Let's do it. David packed up his briefcase. One more thing. I ran a background check on Dawn Mangum. Craig looked at him sharply. And? David hesitated. She's done this before. A heavy silence filled the room. Craig's pulse quickened. You mean she's stolen houses before? David nodded. She's been involved in multiple questionable real estate transactions, but no convictions. She's slippery. Craig inhaled sharply. Not this time. David glanced at his watch. Meet me at the courthouse in the morning. We're stopping this eviction. And then, he narrowed his eyes, we hunt her down. Craig arrived at the Wake County Courthouse just after dawn, gripping a folder packed with every piece of proof he could find. His original deed, tax payments, mortgage statements, utility bills, his entire life in paper form. David was already waiting outside, his phone pressed to his ear. He nodded when he saw Craig and ended the call. Good news, he said. We got an emergency hearing. The judge will review the case before the eviction order can go through. Craig exhaled. And the bad news? David's jaw tensed. Mangum hasn't responded to any of our filings. It's like she's vanished. Craig clenched his fists. Not for long. They entered the courthouse and filed their affidavit of fraud. Within minutes, Craig was called into a hearing with a judge, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone. David presented the case, laying out every detail. Your Honor, this was not a sale. This was deed fraud, a crime that has left my client in legal limbo while a complete stranger tries to steal his home. The judge frowned, flipping through the documents. The signature doesn't match, he muttered. This notary, highly suspect. He looked up at Craig. Dr. Adams, you're saying you never met Dawn Mangum? Craig shook his head firmly. Never seen her in my life. The judge nodded. I'm granting an injunction on the eviction. Craig nearly collapsed with relief. David smirked. Which means, Your Honor, it means the house cannot be transferred, sold, or claimed by Mangum until this case is fully investigated. The judge scribbled his signature. And I'm forwarding this to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Craig's pulse raced. Finally, a win. But then, David's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting. What is it? Craig asked. David turned the phone toward him. It was an email from his private investigator. A grainy surveillance photo showed a woman walking into a bank. The caption read, Dawn Mangum spotted withdrawing cash. Raleigh branch. Timestamp, 10 minutes ago. Craig's eyes darkened. She's still here. David nodded. And she's on the move. Craig grabbed his jacket. Let's go. David hesitated. Craig, we should wait for... But Craig was already heading for the door. It was time to end this. Craig and David drove through the busy streets of Raleigh, North Carolina, heading toward the last known location of Dawn Mangum, a local bank branch where she had just withdrawn cash. Craig's hands gripped the wheel tightly. His heart pounded. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about justice. David was on the phone with the private investigator. Any updates? She left the bank, the investigator replied. She's heading toward a strip mall. Looks like a small office complex. Craig's jaw clenched. An office? For what? Minutes later, they pulled into the parking lot of a rundown building with faded signage. David pointed to a door labeled Mangum Financial Services. Craig exhaled sharply. She's running a scam operation right out in the open. David nodded grimly. Let's see if she's home. They stepped inside. A receptionist looked up, startled. Can I help you? David flashed his lawyer's badge. We're here to speak with Dawn Mangum. The receptionist hesitated. She's in a meeting. Craig leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "Then we'll wait." Before the receptionist could respond, a door behind her creaked open, and there she was, Dawn Mangum. She was tall, thin, with sharp, calculating eyes. She carried herself with confidence until she saw Craig. Her face paled. She knew. David took a step forward. "Ms. Mangum, I'm David Langford, legal representative for Dr. Craig Adams. We have filed a fraud case against you regarding the illegal transfer of his home." She forced a smile. I think there's been a misunderstanding." Craig's voice was ice. There hasn't." Dawn shifted, trying to keep her composure. "I thought the house was abandoned. I filed the paperwork legally." David scoffed. "Forging signatures? Using a shady notary? Filing for eviction against the real owner? You knew exactly what you were doing." Dawn's eyes darted toward the exit. She was looking for a way out. At that moment, the front door swung open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. "Dawn Mangum," one of them said, resting a hand on his holster. She turned pale. What's this about?" The officer pulled out a warrant. "You're under arrest for attempted fraud, forgery, and filing false documents." Craig crossed his arms as the officers stepped forward, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists. Dawn Mangum, the woman who had nearly stolen his home with nothing but paper and lies, was finally caught. As she was led away, Craig turned to David. "Is this really over?" David nodded. "We'll still need to go through legal proceedings, but with the evidence we have, your name will be restored on the deed." Craig let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for weeks. He looked at his house, his home, and for the first time in a long time, he felt safe.